All right, I just wanted to touch on something I found really interesting on a government website. So in British Columbia, the government controls all public schools, and they also put in place what's called the superintendents and the associate superintendents. Basically, the BC government puts all the top people in positions of power, and this is done rather secretly. There's, from what I understand, there's not even a resume process for all the top people. They're just appointed by the BC government, which in this case right now, as we speak in 2022, is John Horgan and his team, Premier John Horgan and his team. So this is a common website for a school in Vancouver. So this is the Vancouver School Board, which is run by the British Columbia government. We are kind of a communist state, but I'm going to explain this in a second here. So we're going to go on to guidance and support. And this is an organization I've had a lot of experience with. So we'll do full screen here. So this is a page from a top high school in Vancouver, which again is run by the British Columbia government. Number one thing, Canadian Health Week. Canadian Mental Health Week, nonsensical gibberish. What is Canadian Mental Health Week? It's a week set aside to acknowledge mental health. We've known about mental health since the beginning of time. It's nothing new. The government's really not added anything except created an industry with mental health. But there's no regulation, there's no accountability, there's no direction except creating all these counselors who pay taxes. So it's a business created by the Canadian government. It's good to acknowledge mental health. The Canadian government, the British Columbia government, sees a lot of financial taxes coming in through creating a whole bunch of counselors. Vancouver School Board counselors are not held to any standard. All their training is different. Some of them, have never even taken proper counseling programs. All counselors in the Vancouver School Board, of all the counselors in the Vancouver School Board, none of them belong or have to belong to the regulatory body for counselors. Unlike a doctor in British Columbia, all doctors have to belong to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of British Columbia, which is their regulatory board. So you have someone to complain to. Counselors, there's no one to complain to. If a counselor does something that falls outside the realm of criminal, there's nothing you can do. There's no accountability. So counseling is a wonderful job in that there's no accountability. Nobody really knows what you do all day. And if you do something sketchy, there's no one to complain to. And I can tell you that the Vancouver School Board counselors are extremely sketchy. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the second most important thing that the Vancouver School Board and the British Columbia government find. The second most important thing to them is the family justice centers. So family justice counselors, what does that mean? Well, look how high it is up on the list here. It's second, right? So what is the Family Justice Center? Let's click on it. It is an organization. The FJCs are specially trained to help families resolve their issues about guardianship, parenting arrangements, contact with a child, and support. So this organization, I dated a lady a number of years ago in a hiking club I belonged to. She was from Port Coquitlam. Her dad was longshoreman. She was a spoiled brat. She worked as a counselor for this organization. She got drunk one night. She admitted to me that she took great joy in abusing men, especially men from countries where men are considered more powerful. She mentioned Iranian sort of men, Middle Eastern men. She took great joy in helping the women do as much damage to these men as possible based on their ethnicity and their male gender. She had tons of hate, and this is really, really common in the justice Center, which again is the province of British Columbia. So what they do is a woman walks in there. There's no waiting time. You just walk in the door, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of women will be waiting for you. So pretty rare in government to be able to get answers, to get service instantaneously. But the BC government makes a lot of money off of divorce. So they have made this their top priority to help tear apart families and essentially to abuse men. Usually they're the payer. So they'll help you aggressively get as much child support and spousal support as you can humanly get from the male. They'll teach you how to subtly, but they'll teach you how to alienate a child from their dad. And this is, they even have courses on it. Now, it's subtle. It's under the guise of, don't do this, but hint, hint, hint. This is how you do it. And my ex-partner had taken the course, and I took the course too, and I could see all the subtleness in how they were teaching parents to essentially lie and keep kids out of the dad's lives based on mostly hate, mostly power, but essentially at the end of the day, it's a business. And now we know that divorce is no fault. It's called no fault. They don't have to have a reason to get divorced in British Columbia, which is fine. But it has become a multi-billion-dollar for-profit industry. When people get divorced, they have to sell their house, they have to sell their vehicles. It's the only part of law, the only type of law. There's business law, there's criminal law, there's, different types of tort law. But family law is the only law where the lawyers get to know how much money you have in your bank account. And that's where the profit starts. So if a lawyer knows that you're getting divorced in between you and your ex-partner or your partner at the time, you have $500,000, everybody knows. The judge gets to know, whether it's provincial court or Supreme Court, and they're both family law courts, they get to know all your assets. So the judge, the lawyer, everybody involved gets to know how much money you have, and that's where they come in and they basically just steal every penny. They can humanly steal, and they can steal a lot. They got hundreds of thousands of dollars from me. Again, I'm Ben Applegate. I don't drink, I don't smoke. No criminal record, never violent. But yeah, I had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to stay in my children's lives. And this all went to lawyers and judges. And it was horrible, horrible, horrible. But the British Columbia has made a lot of money off of me, from the sale of my house to essentially stealing almost all the money out of my bank accounts, under the guise of, well, you need a lawyer because you're going through a divorce, right? And they helped my ex-partner navigate the legal system essentially to alienate me from my kids and get as much money from me and her too. She paid a lot of money. Her hate cost her a lot of money, but the BC government promotes hate. They promote divorce. Federal government does too. And they teach you how to do it. And again, it is the second most important thing and you can see right here, in guidance and support from the school, which is the BC government. It's the second most important thing here. It's absolutely astonishing. It's guidance and support. We're going to guide you and support you through subtle messaging. The BC government is promoting divorce, and they're promoting how they can essentially create wealth for the people at the top through the dismantling, the intentional dismantling of families and the intentional theft from families, and teach angry moms or angry parents how to do it. And the reason for this is, I'll start by saying that I read a lot on policy. Lately, I've been reading a lot on communism. Essentially, communism is just where the state becomes your parents. No longer is your family first and foremost as your parent. The state becomes your parent. The state who basically controls your life and has all the power. No longer does your mom or dad have that power, the state has your power. And don't kid yourself, Canada is a communist country. It follows a lot of the same frameworks as the communist state does. I know that's hard to believe for some people, but it's 100% true. So what the Canadian government and their offshoots, the provincial governments, British Columbia government, are doing right now is the intentional dismantling of families to create power for themselves, and they will be your new parents. And here's all the resources, even the food bank. After they drive up parents into bankruptcy, the government will provide your food for you. All your distress. No longer will you go to your parents. Here's the Vancouver Coastal Regional Distress Line, online chat services for youth. This will be your new mom and dad. It's what they call it, a nanny state. That's what's happening to Canada right now. Should we care? Right? Absolutely should care. What's happening in Canada right now is you got to know, I think most people will agree that the government is pretty dysfunctional, right? I mean, governments can't be what your parents are. Your parents see you every day. They see kids every day. Just like you get to know them, right? You see your kids, you get to know them, you get to help them, you see the signs. So it's not just a phone call. It's you're there, except for me, right? I haven't seen my kids in years now because of parental alienation by the mom and by the lawyers, the judges who promote that, and Judge Ward, branch from the Supreme Court, kind of laughed and said, "Aha, you'll be back to court again," right? Knowing that I'd already been to court 50 times and robbed for hundreds of $1,000s. But the government, back to what I was saying there, is very dysfunctional. So their being your parent is not so good. Them being your parent is not so good. And the fact that they can't take care of you properly like an actual parent could. They're not hands-on. They're taking care of millions and millions of people through what's called policy and procedure. They're not doing it through hands-on, being there 24/7, where a parent just looks after a couple kids. So their job is, it's almost one-to-one, right? That's pretty good service. Where the government has maybe 1 to 1,000, so they employ one person for every 1,000 people they take care of in the nanny state, and they can't do it properly. And what I predict in the years to come, and I've been predicting this for probably the last decade, and it's starting to show up. It's starting to manifest. You're seeing it, the tangible results of the nanny state, and it's only going to get worse. But we see it in homelessness on our streets. Thousands and thousands of people, mostly men, are homeless in British Columbia. I don't travel much of late, but I know British Columbia is loaded from the Sunshine Coast where I spent time, New Westminster, Surrey, Vancouver. Oh, it's even Prince George, cold as hell, minus 20 degrees, and there's homeless people all over the place. Kamloops just overrun with homelessness. Merritt, homelessness. So what's the nanny state? The John Horgans, the Justin Trudeaus, who's intentionally using their family law scheme to gain power and money, create homelessness. They create dysfunction. We saw that with Indian residential schools. But back to what is happening and what I've been watching for the last 10 years is epic homelessness, epic drug overdoses. Why are the number one people overdosing on drugs right now is males over the age of 35 and 40. And there's a lot of 50-year-old men overdosing on drugs. And what that is a type of suicide. why are these people doing drugs? Because they're really, really depressed. And a lot of kids are, taking to drugs because their parents, which is the Justin Trudeau, the John Horgan, are not doing a good job. And they can't, no matter how hard they really try, they can't do a good job because they're looking after too many people. And it doesn't work like that. Without family, things fall apart. Their social project of dismantling individual families. But again, it's manifesting into what we see on the streets is homelessness. We see drug overdoses, people dying like absolute crazy on the streets. Suicide. They spent a lot of money trying to prevent suicide. They put up a whole bunch of barriers on all the bridges, mainly because those type of suicides make the newspaper and it's never good. But yeah, suicides are up. Another thing that's really amazing is child poverty in Canada. Especially British Columbia has one of the highest child poverty rates. Um, Again, I'm Dan Applegate, and I have paid my lawyers probably 40 to 50 times more money than I have given my ex-partner in child support. Now, this isn't something I wanted to do. I had to pay my lawyers, or John Horgan would keep my driver's license. So John Horgan, essentially the BC government, took my driver's license away when I was being abused by a couple lawyers. And all my money was tied up and I couldn't touch it. They had it all frozen and they were dipping in and they were stealing it like crazy from me. Again, they knew how much money I had in my account, which that's how divorce system works. Yeah. So it's an interesting system, and I lost my train of thought there. So yeah, I probably do have PTSD from all I've been through. And again, my name is Ben Applegate, but the fabric of society, I do predict, and this is my prediction, and it is coming true. And I predicted this about 10 years ago, was that we would have epic homelessness. I did not see the drug thing coming, but I knew that there was a lot of drug abuse. People give up, they turn to drugs, right? Um, we're seeing a lot of child poverty. And another thing I really do predict is violence by young people, angry young people who lost access to one of their parents are going to grow up, wondering why I don't have a dad. And they're probably going to get violent. And I just kind of saw this in the newspaper today too. There's been a couple reportings on young people um, acting out and killing other people, right? And I really do predict that's going to be our future. I think it is going to be a bit of a Mad Max. I think the CBC and the global news and other propaganda newspapers and such will downplay it, try to make some money off it. Just good headlines when you have something like that happen. But I do see Canada unraveling. I think what's going to happen is it's almost going to be like the USSR, Russia, where back during the Cold War, Russia almost became, well, it literally became as economically powerful as the United States. But then they stopped learning. They stopped all technology. They just went with the old technology and they just put it into hyper overdrive, and they did very well, but it burnt out. And of course, you see what happened to the USSR, right? It folded. But I do know that all societies do end, and unless unless we're always repairing a society, it does implode, and eventually all societies do implode. I mean, Canada's only a few hundred years old. The United States is only a few hundred years old, and societies before that, all eventually did crumble. I do see the family law scheme, which is a multi-billion dollar. It is the biggest industry in Canada, fueling home sales, fueling mass child support, fueling women who get a new boyfriend and he makes good money, and then she's still getting money from her ex-partner. And we know that, what is it, 80% of all advertising is geared towards women. They are the number one consumer. The government knows this too. Their policymakers know this. That's why they're giving all this power to the mom, because it does fuel the economy. But I do believe this whole scheme by the provincial government and the federal government of Canada, when the federal government essentially dictates what the provincial government does. But John Horgan is a very, very, very willing participant in the family law scheme. Very good buddies with the highly, highly corrupt Justin Trudeau and short-term thinking Justin Trudeau. That I do predict that Canadian society will see a lot more homelessness. You'll see a lot more suicide. They'll see a lot more child poverty. They'll see a lot more violence. They'll see a lot more drug overdoses. I think we're going to see our streets just full of dysfunction. And it's not a stretch, because, there was the Indian residential schools. And over a period of, maybe 70 years of removing children from their parents and putting them in residential schools, the long-term effects of that have been absolutely devastating, with the social dysfunction that it created for the Indians and First Nations. And yeah, they're trying to patch that up, and there's a whole industry making money off of the whole First Nations deal. Again, nobody went to jail for that, which is absolutely shows you how corrupt Canada is, of all the horrific crimes done to the First Nations people in residential schools and being taken away, the 70s scoop and such. I mean, we all know the best way to fuck a society up is to take the children, separate the children from their parents. And here we go. British Columbia government, John Horgan, Valley Justice Centers being promoted through the school system. Why am I not getting onto that? And then this link takes you right to family justice counselors and these horrible, horrible people, just absolute monsters that work down at the Family Justice Center. And again, I know of them. I know them personally. I just mentioned the one woman I knew that worked at the Family Justice Center out in Poco, but I also had some personal dealings, thinking that they were there to help both moms and dads. And I went to the New West one, close to the New West courthouse, when I was going through the New West courthouse through my divorce, which I just stopped going because they don't have any more money. They got me for a couple $100,000 in 15 years of my life, so I don't go anymore. But I did go into an office, and I went out to get some paperwork that they requested. And when I came back in, they didn't realize that I had got into the office sooner than they thought. And I heard them joking and mocking me as a dad. And when I did put a complaint in to the one lady's boss, it essentially just got whitewashed and thrown in the garbage. And that was my introduction to the British Columbia mandated family justice centers. And they also do parental alienation courses. They do a lot of stuff. And in these courses, they actually teach the parents how to alienate children from the other partner. It's subtle, but it is a course on how to do it. And then if you do try to take your spouse to court to get access to your kids, and again, I'm Ben Applegate and haven't seen my kids haven't heard or seen my kids in almost 3 years now. And it's heartbreaking. But I think, what's just as heartbreaking is the long-term effects this will have on Canada. Because this isn't just happening to me, me being cut off from my kids being cut off from their dad, but the whole system is going to implode upon itself, and I fully believe that. And you know, if you're listening to this down the road, you know, has homelessness got any better? Has it gotten worse? You know, has male suicide gotten better? Has it gotten worse? The government does play around with the numbers, so be very careful on that one, because I do know it's going up. Even though the government will tell you that it's stabilized, it's absolutely 100% not true. And I say that because I do look at some of the numbers that are coming out of the United States, and all their numbers are going up. Yes, our communist Canadian government are trying to tell us that our numbers are stabilized. And remember, we just came out of COVID too, right? So if anything, the numbers should be getting worse. So it doesn't make any sense that Canada's are staying the same. But yeah, and then I do predict that violence will go up more so than it already is starting to go up. I think that's the last thing to go up. Child poverty. As lawyers get rich, the money's got to come from somewhere, and it comes from families. And what are families but children, right? And then that'll manifest into less people going to university. My kids aren't going to university. I don't have any more money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were stolen from me, and that was my children's education. And it's gone. It's in the hands now of all the dirty lawyers that ripped me off. And it was a ripoff. You know, it was straight up extortion and theft. The system is a total fraud. The U.S. Supreme Court is a total kangaroo court. You know, the justice, even from the Justice Browns that were there that tried to pretend they're the good cop, there's a lot of good cop, bad cop stuff going on among the judges. They're just actors, and they just make the rules up as they go along. They don't even follow the laws of the day or case law or anything. It's just absolute debauchery in their courtrooms. Some of the stuff that goes on is just absolutely shocking. I advise anybody to go to the new U.S. Supreme Family Courthouse and just see what goes on in there. Just sit for hours, listen, walk around, listen to the duty counselors coaching moms to lie in court. Yeah, I do know once they had a petition up, and I sat there and waited my turn for duty counsel. This is before I realized how corrupt it was. And some of the stuff that these duty councils were encouraging moms to lie about was absolutely shocking. Even as the good moms, and there's a lot of good moms out there, but they were protesting. Well, that's not true. That's not true. And they're saying, oh, that's what you got to tell the judge. That's what you got to tell the judge. You got to say that, you know, this and this and this and this, right? Because this, if you want, what you want is, at the end of the day, is to have as much as possible. Well, what these lawyers really mean is they want as much billable hours as humanly possible. And they don't care about children. I can tell you 100% that lawyers and judges and the British Columbia government and the Canadian government and the Vancouver School Board do not care about children. It's all for profit. It's a for-profit system that's spiraled out of control. And I do believe it'll have long-term consequences on society, and it's kind of heartbreaking. Fortunately, I'm pretty old now. I don't have to. Let me get out of here. I don't have to participate in the next generation of. There it is. Right, my days are numbered. I'm 50, mid 50s now. Been going through the divorce system for the last 15, 16 years. Haven't seen my kids in a couple years, in I think 3 years now. Right, so I'm trying to close out of this. So anyways, yeah, Justin Trudeau, John Horgan. Yeah, shame on you guys. Shame on you guys for what you're doing to families and promoting the Family Justice Center on school websites.
wanted to touch on a couple of books I'm reading right now to supplement this video. One is called The Red Scarf Girl. It's a memoir of the Cultural Revolution in China, mid-70s. Chairman Mao, however you say his name. He was government. He was able to turn family members on against each other to elevate himself to a higher place of power. No longer was your family the one you um, respected, looked up to as a parental figure. It became him, the head of the government, and it was a very tumultuous time. This book, The Red Scarf Girl, by Jiang, a very, very powerful book. Anyone should read it. You got to understand that this kind of book could never be written in China at that time. It would have been murdered. And just as very few people will talk about family law and how powerful the Canadian government is, in how they've turned families against each other in the name of profit. Another one I'm reading right now, just about halfway through this one, it's by Masha Gessen. It's called "The Future Is History," and it's based on the USSR and Russia, and a bit of the history about again communism, where no longer is your family first and foremost. It's the government, and the government's all powerful. What I did find is a really interesting parallel between the Canadian government and their family law scheme, which is absolutely a massive financial boost to the Canadian economy, is fear. That was one of the things that Masha talks about, is just how afraid people were and are in Russia to this day under the sort of the communist system. And that is very common in family law. If you go into any courthouse, you can just see how terrified moms and dads are of these judges that are put in place by politicians. Provincial court is put in by provincial politicians, and then the Supreme Court, where I went to in New Westminster, is those judges are put in place by the Prime Minister's office. So it's all a top-down, very communist-like system. But yeah, two really, really important books to understand just how powerful a government is and why they want to turn families against each other, um, and its power and money. And one of the things fueling the Canadian economy is divorce. It has a massive, massive economic spin-off. No longer do we have very many exports in Canada going to other countries. All we have is internal service-like kind of jobs, and these are lawyers and doctors. But lawyers is a really, really big one that brings taxes in for the people at the top, which is the Canadian government, the elites, right, that run the Canadian government. Justin Trudeau is this kind of a puppet guy, right? We all know that the front man is not the person, the brains behind this, but he's obviously become aware of just how much money family law brings in for the Canadian government in the way of taxes. So yeah, two interesting books. I highly suggest that The Red Scarf Girl, very, very powerful, very powerfully written. The author, went through the Cultural Revolution in China and now lives in the United States. And we do have a lot more freedoms, obviously, in Canada, but it is just as corrupt, if not more corrupt, because at least it was a simplistic idea of Chairman Mao, right? More simplistic than the layers and layers and layers of corruption of the Canadian government and their family law scheme that's tearing apart families in the name of profit and power. So yeah, absolute must read, The Red Scarf Girl by Jai Ling Jiang, so it's J-I apostrophe L-I, and the last name is Jiany, and then to understand fear and how governments instill fear in the people, and there's a lot of the government separating parents away from their children and family as punishment, and that is in this book, The Future is History, with Masha Gessen. It's two S's, not Gessen is the last name, and definitely two books worth reading to understand that the Canadian government is not just accidentally creating this family law atrocity happening in Canada. This is 100% planned and executed by the Canadian government in the name of just absolutely massive, massive amounts of profit, right? It's essentially what, I don't know what percentage of the gross domestic product it is, but it's a large, large part. No longer do we have exports going out of our country. We just have the government feeding off of the people, and it's destroying families. And it, again, I talked about that earlier of how it's creating major, major dysfunction in the homelessness, the bankruptcies, the suicides, the drug addiction, even the alcohol addiction. Um, and then we have, of course, the CBC and globals telling us that everything is hunky dory and the rest of the world's all the bad. Meanwhile, we just, we have child poverty now in Canada. Just lots and lots of bad stuff happening. But yeah, definitely read those two books to understand that the governments of the world have always gone after families. It's just that, I mean, it's where the power is, right? So it's unfortunate, but hopefully one day the Canadian government will see that in the long term, it's not the way to go. And it'll have devastating consequences, much like the Indian residential schools did for decades to come.